I don't know why I've never posted this here before. Let me tell you all about our haunted townhouse. In February 2011, shortly after my husband and I got married, we moved into a 3-bedroom townhouse. It wasn't right away that we realized we weren't its only inhabitants. Our first experience we didn't even realize until looking back months later. It was late one night, just before midnight. My 3-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son had their own rooms upstairs. My husband and my room was right at the bottom of the steps. We were heading to bed when we heard my daughter yell, "Get out of my room!" and little feet pitter-pattered down the hall to my son's room. So we both went upstairs, me to get after the boy for being out of bed, him to check on the girl. Both kids were sound asleep, and my son's bedroom door was closed, which we would have heard close if it had even been open in the first place. We wrote off the experience. My daughter had always yelled in her sleep, and the footsteps could have been from a neighbor. But a few nights later, we started hearing things in the kitchen in the middle of the night. Things were rattling around, falling off the counters, drawers opening and closing. At first we thought it was the kids, but when we'd go out there, no one was there. We checked their beds and they were sound asleep. The dining table chairs would move in the night, and anything we'd ever leave on the table would be on the floor when we woke up. We'd hear footsteps upstairs, and sometimes we thought we heard whispering. My husband would try to stay up at night in the living room to watch, but on those nights, nothing ever happened. Eventually, he decided to set up a camera. We didn't have any fancy equipment, so he used his HTC phone, cleared all the memory, and left it plugged in and on record from about midnight until whenever it cut off the video. At around 1 a.m., it recorded this. Please accept my apology for the low quality and the darkness, but most of all the fact that it's sideways. For weeks after this, I made my kids sleep in the room with me. We stayed in the townhouse for lack of other options. We heard these things almost nightly, but nothing bad ever happened. My husband is a skeptic. For the most part, he still is. He swears there has to be a logical explanation for what we saw in this video, but I've had these experiences before we were married. For a while, I thought it was something that had attached itself to my daughter. She's told me since she was 18 months old that there was a man in our house, old house, not the townhouse, named Charming. Here's a little more into that story. The house we were moving into was small and crudely put together. It seemed as though the original owner had built it himself. The floors, cabinets, and walls were not completely straight. The original hardwood floor was cracked and filled with crumbs and dust. Needless to say, it was creepy right off the bat. Living alone was new to me. I always had lived with family, friends, or my children's father, but recently I had left him, and me and our 2 small children had moved into our own home. The first night I spent there, I tucked my daughter into bed and had an uneasy feeling about the closet in her room. But I wrote it off as first night jitters and climbed into bed myself. The unsettling feeling of being watched continued with the closet in her room, and also the closet in my own room, the basement, and the kitchen right in front of the basement door. Whenever I was in the kitchen, it felt as though someone were standing in that doorway watching me. When I opened either closet, I also felt piercing eyes on me. Going down the basement to do laundry was the worst. I always felt like someone was in the back of the basement near the crawl space watching me, and then it would follow me so close, as if it were breathing on my neck, up the stairs until I shut the door. Still, I justified it, telling myself I was just afraid of being alone for the first time. 2 weeks into living there, my 18-month-old daughter told me she was afraid of the man in the kitchen. She pointed to him and said his name was Charming and that he lived in the basement. Weeks later, on the drive home from my parents' house, she asked me if we were going back to his house. I told her we were going back to our house. She said, "No, that's his house." At this point, nothing strange had happened. No swinging cupboards or doors left open, just eerie, uncomfortable feelings. But that night, when I tucked her into bed and turned on her radio like I always do, the voice was so loud it startled me, and instead of music, it was a deep, rough male voice, demonic almost. I listened for another moment, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. as if it was in another language. I quickly tuned the radio to another station and spent the rest of the night trying to justify the voice. Maybe it was a different electronic communication device getting its radio signal mixed up. After that, nothing else happened for months. My husband, boyfriend at the time, was staying with us for a while, and I had explained a little about charming and the things I felt, but he never believed in any of that stuff anyways. Weeks after, I came home from work and he was outside waiting in the driveway. He said it didn't feel comfortable going back in alone. My bedroom door never stayed open. It didn't close all the way, but it swung back and stayed half open. I'm sure it was because the house was so lopsided. So we kept an old boombox radio in front of it to hold it open. He told me he placed the boombox in front of the door, walked through the house, and went outside for about 5 minutes. And when he came back in, the bedroom door was closed all the way, and the boombox was on the inside. Days later, I was in the shower, and I heard someone walk past the bathroom door 3 times. Once from the bedroom, the kitchen, then back to the kitchen once more. When I got out of the shower, I went into the bedroom where my boyfriend was twisted all up in the blankets, sound asleep. I shook him awake and asked what he was looking for in the kitchen. He said he hadn't been in the kitchen. He was asleep in bed the whole time. Later that week, as he was leaving for the store, I watched the car pull out of the driveway and speed down the road. I headed into the basement and was putting laundry into the dryer when I heard footsteps upstairs walk from the front of the house to the back and then again to the front. When I went up there, no one was there. Shortly, my boyfriend returned, and I asked him if he had come back and then left again. He said he hadn't. Throughout the next couple of weeks, we would hear small noises at night. The magnets from the entertainment center cabinets clicking together and apart but not opening. The TV turned on a couple of times. There would be footsteps in the attic. Small things that didn't faze me. We tried to take pictures of eerie places around the house to see if maybe something would appear, but to no avail. It wasn't until my boyfriend moved across the state that things started happening again. It was my birthday. My plans got ruined and I was sitting home alone, sad, with all the lights off. I started hearing this very loud banging sound. At first I thought it was fireworks because it was July, but the sound was far too loud and close by to be fireworks. I figured out that it was coming from the attic. Nothing too strange ever happened in the attic before, just footsteps every so often, so I was slightly alarmed. It sounded like a hammer banging on wood. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, and it sounded as if something large and heavy was being dragged across the floor of the attic to the opposite side of the house. Moments later, footsteps walked from that side of the attic back to the side where the banging had been. The process started again, banging, dragging, footsteps, again and again. I went outside and called a friend over, but by the time she got there, it had stopped. A week or so after that, I was lying in bed alone, and I felt like something was standing close to my bed. It's never been in my room when I've been in bed before. It was probably the creepiest moment out of all the things that happened during that year and a half. It was also the last. I moved out of the house 2 months later. I've been back a couple times, no one lives there, and still during the day you can look and see in all the windows through the cracks and the shades. At night, if you look in from the side of the living room, you can see a light flickering like a flame from under the door of what used to be my kid's room.